So it's been a while since we last checked in on all of PlayStation Studios, but now I think is a great time to do that when we have so much speculation going on, rumors, and also confirmed games for the internal and some external developers. So let's cover up that for all the games we're expecting on PlayStation 5 for the remainder of this year and 2026 and beyond. So beginning with Team Asobi, we do know they just released what we think is maybe the final round of speedrun levels for Astrobot, with more VIP bots as well. So as far as we know, that should be it. However, there could obviously be more post-launch support, but in the meantime, I think we can safely say they're going to be doing another maybe Astrobot game, or at the very minimum, something in the 3D platforming landscape, which is sort of their wheelhouse at this point. Moving on to Bend Studio, located in Bend, Oregon. They did have a live service game in development for a few years, which was a new IP based on the open world systems they established in Days Gone. However, that game has been canceled, so the clock is sort of reset here as far as their next big thing. In the meantime, they did have a smaller portion of the studio working on Days Gone Remastered, and that will release on April 25th. So we do have something coming from Bend, but as far as something entirely new or different, that is still going to be quite a ways out, which is unfortunate. And that also is true for Bluepoint Games, where they were allegedly working on a God of War live service game, and that too was recently canceled, which there's still a lot of contention surrounding why Bluepoint was doing that, and we've sort of discussed that many times over as far as why they might have felt the pressure to pitch that game, and that was the sort of new original content they were working on. But what we can say in the here and now is that between Bluepoint and Bend, it might be quite a bit until we see something new from those studios. Next up is the brand new studio, Dark Outlaw Games, where we knew this team was basically an open secret, we just didn't know what it was named, but it's called Dark Outlaw Games based in Los Angeles, and this was the new team that was confirmed from Jason Blundell. He's formerly of Activision on the Call of Duty franchise, also more recently leaving Deviation Games a few years back, and he is now leading this new team. So we don't necessarily have any idea as far as what this game is going to be. It is basically informed speculation that it could be a shooter, multiplayer, PvP, just based on the talent and the kind of games they made before. But for the time being, we do know that they're still staffing up and they're in the early production stage of what is going to be a new game for PlayStation 5, presumably also PlayStation 6. A lot of these games that we're discussing right now, if they're not slated to come out within the next 1 or 2 years, you can probably safely expect that these games may also have either a PlayStation 6 version day and date or possibly a little bit later down the road. We are likely going to see a lot of cross-gen games for some of these late lifecycle PS5 titles. Moving on to Firesprite, they're working on a dark, story-driven, next-generation narrative adventure game, and the running theory is that this is based on an existing IP, with many thinking it's an Until Dawn sequel. So there's really not much more we can say outside of this game might be revealed within the next year or so. It's really hard to say. It has been in development for quite a bit now, and Sony has very much been committed to having these projects come out next to, or at least a little bit close to, PlayStation production releases. So, excuse me, we know the movie is coming out next month, so we have that. We have the Until Dawn remake that came out a few months back now at this point, which unfortunately that studio is effectively closed. But at the very minimum, it seems like if Sony is committed to the Until Dawn IP, then it would at least track that they want a sequel to be done, albeit from a different studio. But for the time being, we know that that is the description for this game, and it's really a matter of time when Firesprite is ready to pull the curtain off on this thing. Next up, developer Housemarque, located in Helsinki, Finland, recently revealed Saros at the February State of Play, which is going to be a sort of spiritual successor to Returnal. It might be within the same universe, but essentially it is a new character, and it's going to have the same bullet hell arcade-style action, and we are getting gameplay for this later this year, and the game's coming out next year. So not too long until we see more of this game, and Housemarque did really want to drive home this point of not only are they committed to their bullet hell gameplay style action, not only are they still going to try and weave in a narrative, but they do want to make it very clear that the key difference from this game and Returnal is that there is going to be a more standard affair upgrade progression path in between your runs to where you're going to be carrying a lot more things into the next cycle. So if you played Returnal and really got beat down pretty bad, considering the game is a little bit atypical as far as the kind of things that you carry into the next run, which is primarily just one permanent resource and then a few key items and then your weapon upgrades, this might be a little bit more by the books as far as maybe a game like Hades, where you can start really expanding suit augments, power, health, things like that. So for the time being, Saros, we should see more of this game later this year. Next up, we have Guerrilla Games, located in Amsterdam, and we are expecting in the short term that their next game is going to be the Horizon multiplayer co-op style spin-off game, which has been in development since at least 2018, also being directed by Simon LaRouche, who was formerly of Ubisoft, being the game director on Rainbow Six Siege, and they've been leading this game for years now at this point. We've been following this project, and there's been very little updates as far as anything new, but we have seen prior leaks and key art for the game, which has given us the general sales pitch for the game, which is that it is going to be a sort of co-op Monster Hunter-esque gameplay loop, and that also the environments and the characters are going to be a little bit more atypical from the Horizon franchise, and that it's not going to be hyper-realistic, but instead focusing more on cartoony looking characters. So the one gameplay leak that we have, which again is super early, but you have the more cartoony looking characters plopped into Forbidden West looking environments, which is just a very, again, early thing to sort of play test and figure the gameplay loop out. And that was very old from the time that we got that leak, which could have also been dated by the time it came out in 2021, if I'm not mistaken. But the point is, we are getting to a point where we might be seeing this game very soon. I expect that when we do see it, if it is, say, this year, for example, it would be very similar to a Concord or a Helldivers 2, where by the time they make a formal reveal of the game, it would be playable and released within a 3, 4, let's say 5-month window, something like that. So chances are when we do see this game, it will be released and playable perhaps within the same year. And I think that maybe this would be the year where that finally happens. But elsewhere throughout Guerrilla Games, where they're a very big studio, they're also very likely still toiling away on what is going to be the third entry for the mainline Horizon franchise, which is also very likely years away. So we're looking at a game that is very likely going to be a PS5, PS6 title in 2027 or beyond, quite frankly. But they are still working away on that. And in semi-adjacent Horizon news, there is also the NCSoft project, the Horizon MMO, which that game might look very different from the Horizon multiplayer game, but that's at NCSoft, and if you heard the rumors prior, that project is allegedly not canceled, so that should still be ongoing, and Guerrilla would at least play a very small role in overseeing that project. Very similar to what they did with Studio Gobo with the Horizon Lego game, so either providing some support roles or at the very minimum overseeing that project. Moving on to Haven Studios, located in Montreal, spearheaded by Jade Raymond. This team still working on Fair Games. They had their formal reveal 2 years ago, and there's been not much going on since then. It's been very quiet, but still something where we've had one rumor suggesting that this game saw an internal delay from this year to next year, and that's a very important thing to clarify, which is it was internal. There was never any public announcement of the game having a release window, just no release window, period. Not this year, next year, we have no idea. We just have a general sales pitch based on that cinematic trailer of it being a heist style game. We are going after the rich and taking their goods and their valuables and things like that. So for the time being, not much that we can really say for Haven outside of, if the rumors are to be believed, the game is going to come out sometime next year. We also heard from Christopher Dring of GamesIndustry.biz that internal sentiment on this project is quite high and that they believe in the project. And the thing that we should always clarify, especially in the live service segment where we know it's been well documented that Sony's had a lot of struggles in this regard, canceling a number of projects, that's the whole point. That's the context. When they cancel a number of games that are in development for 2-3 years and they can see from milestone builds that these games are not going to make it, and they're having some very tough lessons learned from their acquisition of Bungie, canceling The Last of Us multiplayer, releasing Concord and that game outright failing. All of those things have already happened, and so now it's like, okay, what games are they going to see through to the end with those lessons now learned? Now, that doesn't guarantee anything, obviously, and I think it's completely fair to have a lot of skepticism going into any sort of new live service games that SIE greenlights or sees through to the end, but it's just important to clarify that they do now have a more stringent process here, and so games that they maybe believe in, there should at the very least be this expectation of maybe they really think they have something versus the other projects that either failed or they had to cancel outright. But with that said, Haven Studios, fair games, still coming at some point. Moving on to Insomniac, they are of course working on Marvel's Wolverine, and we could be seeing more of that game very soon, possibly this year, because the thing that we always have to acknowledge is that we did have a very big data breach from Insomniac, and so while the information was obtained in a very insidious way, it's still something that is just out there now at this point, and we do know the internal timeline for this game is 2026. Now, if that is a target that will still be met, remains to be seen. Things can change very quickly, and so based on when that leak came out, which was already a few months outdated, and that was before the layoffs that took place at Insomniac Games and SIE in a more broader scale, things absolutely could change. But having said that, we know Wolverine is still on the way, and we could see a proper reveal of the gameplay for it at some point, possibly later this year, and if it is still on track, then it will release next year. Also important to acknowledge the other thing that we learned from the Insomniac breach, which was this other smaller scale sort of Miles Morales type project, which is expected to be Marvel's Venom. But the problem with that game is that it is sort of victim to what I just said. We have no idea if that game is still coming or going to come out, or quite frankly, any other parts of the Insomniac roadmap could be inaccurate at this point, where we've seen the titles that they want to release and they're looking to do on a scale going up to 2030, but it's really hard to sort of look at that and say confidently that all those things are going to play out, especially given that there's already been so many things relating to Spider-Man 2 which are not accurate up to this point. So it's really tough to say, even with something that was so insightful as far as what the studio is up to. But the thing we can confidently say is that Wolverine is next, and probably coming sometime next year, with gameplay being shown off this year. If there's any other surprises, then that would certainly be welcomed. As for Media Molecule, there's not really a whole lot we can say here, because what we do know is that they did end live service support for Dreams back in September of 2023 to move on to a new project. So we do know they've moved on from Dreams, they are doing something new, but from that point on, there's really not much else to be said. I mean, I think it is fair to make this assessment of, and I certainly believe in this, which is when you look at what happened with Dreams and then spending so much time on Dreams, which was a very big vision of this tool that can make incredible experiences and games within games, and that's always been part of the Media Molecule DNA going back to Little Big Planet. It was very ambitious, and there's a lot to be said on how maybe Sony didn't let them see that all the way through by shipping on PS5, PC, letting creators really own their projects, be able to publish it outside of Dreams on the PlayStation Store, maybe publish on PC. There's very clearly a big vision that just did not even come close to the reality of what Media Molecule was looking to do, which a lot of that is based on player engagement and how they were growing the player base, which it quite frankly wasn't growing. But the point is, when you have that much behind them, what do they do now? I would think that's not going to be something like Dreams again. So maybe something that's a little bit more consumer focused, like say a Tearaway, because Tearaway is still very much a consumer focused game, but it's still part of the Media Molecule DNA of it being very artsy and cute and different and going against the grain of what we expect from SIE with these more recent late lifecycle PS4 AAA single player cinematic experiences, right? It can still be that, but also something that is meant to really be sold to customers in a way that seems a little bit more friendly and not overly ambitious of, sure, there is single player content here, but the sales pitch really is you're looking to create and play other player created experiences, and maybe it's likely not that. If I had to guess, I would say that Media Molecule is going to pitch a game and be in the process of making a game that is more by the books, as far as you download it, play it, see it to the end, and then you just sort of move on, right? So we'll see what happens, but it might be a little bit until we hear from Media Molecule. Next up, Naughty Dog, located in Santa Monica, California. They've finally confirmed a new IP, and that is Intergalactic: The Heretic Prophet, where they showed this off during the Game Awards 2024, and it very much is something entirely different from what the studio has typically done, where you've got this alternate history timeline, very sci-fi. You've got a bounty hunter named Jordan going to a planet where this planet has lost communication for the last 600 years. She's there alone. She needs to get off the planet. Naughty Dog has also talked about how they're going to be spending a lot of time not just weaving this very complex narrative in there, but it's also about player freedom. It's also about being alone and trying to get off the planet. And there's a lot that Naughty Dog seems to be exploring. As far as the story goes, they're also looking at faith and religion and what these people were doing on the planet. And so we've got a fair amount of plot synopsis that we can dive into, but for the most part, we do know the game was in development from at least 2020, so right after The Last of Us Part 2 shipped. So we've got about 4 years from then to now where they were willing to show this in-engine footage. And so it's plausible that they were comfortable showing this because they know this game, let's say, has an internal target of 2026, maybe at the latest 2027. Naughty Dog is one of those studios where we've seen time and time again they will put out some sort of release window and they miss it. Another release window, they miss it. These things tend to happen at that studio. Maybe they've sort of learned their lesson. You would think a lot of PlayStation first-party teams have sort of been in that position where they're not looking to announce or show off their games until they feel very confident that they've got a window internally that they are going to hit. But point being, we don't know exactly what that window is, but it would be plausible to say that if they're showing this much already, for the first time we're seeing this game, then maybe it is a 2026 title. With that in mind, we do know they also had a lot of folks that were working on The Last of Us multiplayer, and that game was unfortunately canceled. So you've got that, which Naughty Dog is a very big team with multiple projects ongoing. So it's really tough to say as far as what else is happening. You could have the very early concept or pre-production stage for The Last of Us Part 3, or maybe not, considering Neil Druckmann has gone on record very recently backpedaling, saying that maybe that's not going to happen. There's a lot of back and forth between fans as far as what that comment really meant, but I think the one thing we can say very safely in the here and now is that whatever that game is, that next project after Intergalactic, it's very far away. So with that in mind, what we can say in the short term is that Intergalactic is expected probably in 2026 or 27. Nixxes Software. This is PlayStation Studios' PC team, where they acquired them primarily for working on PC ports, and they have been doing just that ever since they were brought into SIE. More recently, they were supporting The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered on PC, but they also led the development of Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered as more of an original work and not just a PC port job, because that game very much is a remaster and it looks visually quite different from the original 2017 release. And Nixxes has gone on record saying that they will be doing more of these projects as well. So while they have been knocking out a lot of the back catalog of semi-recent PlayStation Studio titles from PS4, PS5, and moving those over to PC, we might be seeing them slot into the role of remasters or port jobs based on Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered and them wanting to do more of those titles, and also being in the spot where they've already shipped a number of those late lifecycle PS4 games on PC. So unless they go older than that, we might see them get into this role of remastering and porting works, sort of like what Bluepoint was doing for quite a while, because Bluepoint also has gone on record saying that they want to work on original content and move away from that sort of specialty niche of being a remaster port studio. So if that still tracks with what their next project is going to be, which is going to be something entirely new and it's going to be an original work, then maybe Nixxes would slot into that role of the PC ports, but also maybe doing port or remaster jobs. That's speculation on my part, but just based on what they've been doing, that also seems like a realistic possibility. Next up, Polyphony Digital is mostly an open and shut case because they are the Gran Turismo team. That's what they've always done, and it's likely what they will do for quite a while now at this point. But what we can say is that they have been supporting Gran Turismo 7 on PS4 and PS5 for a number of years. New cars, new tracks, new enhancements to GT Sophie, adding PSVR 2 support. And the other aspect that we can cover here is the one rumor regarding if there will or will not be a PC version of this game. Now, we expect that, oh, okay, well, PlayStation Studios has been doing a number of PC games, so GT7 is very likely going to happen at some point. It was on the NVIDIA leak list, but there's been recent discussion surrounding that maybe that version of the game was canceled, and instead they're actually going to wait until Gran Turismo 8, which does make sense, if only because we're talking about a studio that has only ever done for decades now at this point console development. And this is not a game where you ship it and you're kind of done with it. They continue to support it in a very live service-esque manner. So if they're going to sort of incorporate PC development into their pipeline, it might be more advantageous and an easier transition for the studio if they wait for a new mainline entry, which would also expectedly drop PlayStation 4 development, so that might be the most viable path for them if they are going to do a PS5 and let's say PC version of Gran Turismo 8, which that game will then see a number of years for content support thereafter. So having said that, we are also probably not too far away from a Gran Turismo 8 in theory, but if there's one thing we can probably safely say about Polyphony Digital, it is more Gran Turismo. Now, very similar to Polyphony, we also have San Diego, where they are the MLB team, and that's it. That's what they've always done. MLB The Show every year on time, just now on more platforms. And that's the somewhat recent development, is that for years now they've been shipping on not only PlayStation but Xbox and Nintendo. And so if anything, the only thing we can really say here is that maybe by the time Nintendo is ready to show off more of Nintendo Switch 2, we would get a better idea of what San Diego is planning on doing for that particular platform, if they will ship MLB The Show 25 on Nintendo Switch 2 this year, or if they will just wait for the next annual entry and ship on that, and then also abandon Switch, because this was the first year that they left behind Xbox One and PlayStation 4. So in theory, I guess that's the one thing we can say, is that based on what Nintendo may or may not do going into next year, we might see them abandon the Switch and only focus on a Switch 2 version, or maybe do both, but it seems like we have no indications at all that they are not doing anything outside of MLB. Moving on to Santa Monica Studio, also known as the God of War team, because that's the one thing about Santa Monica, is that historically they've done Kinetica and then God of War, God of War, God of War, and it's been just that for a very long time. They had a sci-fi IP in development back in 2017, and that was shut down. And so it's a very exciting prospect that the next big thing from Santa Monica is very likely going to be this Cory Barlog new IP project that's been in development for a number of years now as well. And it does seem like that game is okay right now, but we don't really know a whole lot about it outside of new IP, and it's probably what Cory Barlog has been spending a lot of time doing. So with that said, that's really all we're waiting on, is the next big new IP from Santa Monica, which would be exciting considering the studio's history of primarily doing God of War for such a long time. But we really just don't know if that game is going to be shown off soon or next year. I mean, I think it's really up for debate, but what we can acknowledge is the Santa Monica adjacent news, because we don't know for certain where this game would even be. But we've had the ongoing rumor with the recent 20th anniversary for God of War that, hey, what's going on with this God of War remaster collection? Is it a remaster collection? We've had a more recent update on this rumor, which is previously it came from Jeff Grubb. Now he's clarifying this, saying that he's heard it's actually a side story on Kratos back in Greece, and it's not a remaster collection. So that technically does track with what we heard from Tom Henderson, where he at the time clarified, hey, I didn't look too much into this, but I have heard about them going back to Greece and it being about a young Kratos. So we have at least two different sources now sort of chiming in that this next God of War thing that they're planning on doing, which will certainly be small in scope, and it is very much a video game, which Jeff Grubb did clarify after looking into it, that is something that will come out later this year. But we don't know if that's at Santa Monica. I mean, you would think that it's maybe somebody else handling it, and Santa Monica is just doing that typical either code development or just overseeing role to sort of make sure that they're keeping up with the lore of the franchise and approving certain changes and things and behaviors and all that good stuff that normally comes with a different studio handling an IP that one studio initially birthed. Having said that, that's the most recent thing about this God of War remaster rumor, which is that it's maybe not even a thing. But for the time being, that is the Santa Monica adjacent news and the God of War property. At least for Santa Monica proper, we do know that new IP is brewing. Sucker Punch Productions in Bellevue, Washington. We know that Ghost of Yotei is coming out this year, the next major entry in the Ghost of franchise. We have one trailer, but this game is still on time. There's no indications that it's going to be delayed or that it's going to slip into 2026. We have a recent shareholder meeting from SIE, which does clarify, yes, the game is still coming out this calendar year, which means we think this game is probably going to get a new trailer within maybe that May timeframe where they tend to hold a state of play right near Summer Game Fest, and maybe that will be the time where they show off another trailer and confirm the release date, which this game is likely looking to be in that Q3, Q4 slot. I'm sure Sony still wants to be a bit mindful of a big title like, say, Grand Theft Auto 6, if that game also comes out on time. But right now, what we can say is that Yotei is still full steam ahead, coming out this year, and, well, I'm very excited, that's for sure. Now, another new PlayStation studio developer we can mention is one that was spun off from Bungie. This team has no name right now, but it did begin from an incubation project at Bungie where it's codenamed Gummy Bears. And as part of a major restructure at Bungie and Sony coming in to handle more of the financial back end of the studio, this team was repositioned as a new studio under the PS Studios umbrella, which on a technicality, Bungie is still considered outside of PlayStation Studios, but this new team will be under PS Studios. Gummy Bears itself has been described as a team-based MOBA, where it features a bright, colorful, lo-fi aesthetic, and while it does still use weapons, it might use a knockout system similar to Smash Brothers. And apparently enthusiasm for this project was high within Bungie, and it must have been enough for SIE to spin it off into a new team. As for when we'll see this game is anybody's guess, but if Sony wants to be more careful with live service projects, it might be in their best interest to release this in early access and get people playing the game to start a community feedback loop before they sink massive amounts of money into it, only for it to then fail. Now moving on to XDEV projects, and these are still considered PlayStation Studio first-party titles, but Death Stranding 2 on the Beach from Kojima Productions. We have a confirmed date from that recent trailer at South by Southwest. The game's coming out June 26th, and the trailer is just as unhinged as any other Kojima Death Stranding trailer, just Kojima in general, but we do know that DS2 on the Beach is coming out this summer. Very exciting stuff. Also important to note that we have another game coming from Kojima after this, which is PHYSINT. It's still likely very far away, but that was a new agreement that SIE and Kojima Productions announced during the January 2024 State of Play. The only thing we know about this game is that it is going to be Kojima returning back to his roots with Konami, which is focusing on a tactical espionage action game. So that's also very exciting in theory, but it's still a game that is going to be very far away. We're talking PS6 timelines here. But we do have that project that is in the pipeline as well. And in more recent developments, we also have a new agreement Sony signed with developer People Can Fly, which is the studio behind Bulletstorm, Outriders, also doing a code development agreement with Microsoft on Gears of War E-Day. So they're working on a new prototype with SIE, which means this game is also very far away. We're talking PS5, PS6 in all likelihood, but the studio is working on what is considered a property owned by SIE, which could be interpreted as a new IP, or also just an IP that Sony is going to publish and own, but People Can Fly will be the ones making that particular project. But that is the most recent new agreement Sony has signed with an external partner. And that, folks, is for the most part the most up-to-date short-term expectations from these studios, and I want to really clarify that short-term for PS Studios, internal and external, since I know there are some out there that like to keep running lists of all these developers and their multiple projects and based on job listings, and I find that those lists do make a lot of very bold assumptions as far as what these teams are up to. But if you want the most solid expectations of what every team and what SI is up to right now, this, for the most part, is what you need to know before we start getting into territory that is highly, highly speculative. So with that in mind, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in my next video. You take it easy.